About 10 or 15 years ago, a successful Hollywood producer named Aaron Russo sat for an interview that nobody really talks about anymore. Russo was Bette Midler's manager. He worked on the film Trading Places. And in this interview, Russo goes into some detail about a conversation he had with one of the members of the Rockefeller family. Specifically, Russo claims that the Rockefeller Foundation and the U.S. government spent a lot of money funding the feminist movement for reasons that are not remotely related to equal rights or empowering women. Watch.
We were talking and he started laughing. He said, Aaron, what do you think women's liberation was about? And I said, I had pretty conventional thinking about it at that point. I said, I think it's about women having the right to work, getting equal pay with men, just like they won the right to vote, you know? And he started to laugh. He said, you're an idiot. And I said, why am I an idiot? He said, let me tell you what that was about. We, the Rockefellers, funded that. We funded Women's Lib, you know? And we're the ones who got all over the newspapers and television, the Rockefeller Foundation. He says, and you want to know why? He said, there were two primary reasons. And they were, one reason was we couldn't tax half the population before Women's Lib. And the second reason was, now we get the kids in school at an early age. We can indoctrinate the kids how to think. It breaks up the family. The kids start looking at the state as the family, as the school, as the officials, as their family, not as the parents teaching them.
Now, watching that footage, there are reasons to be skeptical. Even though pretty much every conspiracy theory from the past decade has been proven correct, it's still hard to say whether Russo is a credible source of information. But if Aaron Russo is a fraud, he has one thing that most frauds don't have, which is corroboration. This corroboration comes in the form of a document that was drafted not by some online troll or by a dastardly MAGA Republican or anything like that. Instead, this document was written by a vice president at one of the most powerful left-wing activist groups in the country, an organization you've probably heard of called Planned Parenthood. And every year for decades, Planned Parenthood has received hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer funding. In terms of political impact, they are maybe the single most influential nonprofit in the United States. And I use the term nonprofit very loosely, just like Planned Parenthood does. About 5 decades ago, in 1969, Planned Parenthood produced a step-by-step roadmap for depopulating the United States. And this document is called the Jaffe Memo, after the man who drafted it, Frederick Jaffe, who is also the founder of the pro-abortion Guttmacher Institute. He wrote the document in response to a letter from Bernard Burleson, who was the head of the Population Council. And Burleson wanted a summary of expert opinions on how to make sure that we have fewer people in this country. That's what the Jaffe Memo is supposed to outline, kind of a roadmap for accomplishing that. Jaffe's memo makes clear that the feminist movement is a core component of a much broader depopulation agenda. And that agenda has been achieved, for the most part. Point by point, it has become reality, just like they drew it up. You can go back to 1969 and read this memo, and you will see from that vantage point a look into the future. If you want evidence that pretty much every problem facing Americans today was not just predictable but planned, then this memo is very interesting reading, to say the least. And if you want to know where the depopulation agenda is heading in the future, then it's vitally important that you understand every word of the document. So I'm going to go through the document. This is a memo that I've alluded to at various points on this show over the years. We never spent much time analyzing it in detail, but today we will. That's because it is maybe the single most important document that most people have never heard of. The Jaffe memo begins with this statement, quote, "Continued U.S. population growth will inevitably cause a deterioration in the quality of life of this and future generations." The document adds that many experts believe that, quote, "explicit U.S. policy to encourage or compel smaller family size in the U.S. is necessary." Now, what policy proposals might achieve this goal of depopulating the planet? Well, here's the first column of a chart included at the end of the Jaffe memo. It says, quote, "restructure family, postpone or avoid marriage, alter image of ideal family size, compulsory education of children, encourage increased homosexuality, educate for family limitation, fertility control agents in the water supply, encourage women to work." Okay, let's go through these one by one. Restructure family, postpone or avoid marriage. Well, they accomplished that one, obviously. In the 1960s, the median age of first marriage for men was 23, and for women it was 20. Now the median age for men at their first wedding is over 30, and for women it's 29. This has been a slow and steady climb, and it's still increasing. And you have to keep in mind, of course, that for women, fertility starts to decline rapidly at the age of 30. And now it is right at that moment, right when fertility is declining, right when it hits the precipice and starts to decline, that women are now getting married. Now, of course, there have always been women who marry later in life, and there's nothing wrong with that on an individual level. But as a general societal strategy, it is a recipe for decline and eventually disaster. And this is a recipe that was, as it turns out, quite intentionally concocted. Now let's take the next part of the memo, alter image of ideal family size. And that happened very quickly. The Jeff memo was written in 1969. Just a couple of years later, Pew reports that people suddenly wanted much smaller families. Quote, in 1971, there was a shift in attitudes as Americans' ideal family switched from 4 kids to 2 kids. So just as contraception is being legalized, suddenly everybody wants fewer kids. Another goal of the anti-human forces was achieved. The Jeff memo continues by calling on policymakers to encourage increased homosexuality. So in 1969, they said, this is what we're going to do. Now they appear to be doing it. And if you point out that they're doing it, of course, they say, well, that's not what we're doing. But in black and white, Planned Parenthood is saying 2 things at once. First, that homosexuality can be encouraged. It's not a naturally occurring phenomenon, at least not in their opinion, if it can be encouraged. And then Planned Parenthood is admitting that the goal of encouraging increased homosexuality is not about equal rights, it's about curbing the human population. In various corners of left-wing media, you'll find tacit admissions that this is the reason they're so adamant about promoting homosexuality. The Huffington Post, for example, published an article in 2017 entitled, "Homosexuality is Population Control? Why Gays and Lesbians Are Essential to the Balance of Nature." The article stated that, quote, even without a causal link established between homosexuality and population management, the obvious reduction in population growth attributable to homosexuality by itself indubitably works to preserve the species. Now, if you've ever wondered why it's always the case that the climate nut jobs are in complete agreement with the LGBTQ club, if you've been curious what, environmental Marxism has in common with gay marriage, well, there's your answer. The left views the climate agenda and the gay agenda as 2 components of a larger plan, which is about, among other things, depopulating the planet. The holidays are rapidly approaching, but we can find peace and calm in the craziness of the season with Hallow, the #1 Christian prayer app in the world. Immerse yourself in Christmas and Advent prayers, meditations, and peaceful Christmas music. Hallow also offers an extensive library of Bible reading plans accompanied by insightful reflections and audio-guided meditations. Whether you're a seasoned Bible reader or just starting your journey, Hallow provides a platform for you to engage with Scripture like never before. A great place to start is with Father Mike Schmitz's Bible in a Year, in which he offers brief daily readings and reflections. The Hallow app also helps you connect with a community of like-minded individuals sharing experiences, insights, and encouragement along the path to spiritual growth. This Christmas, join Hallow's Christmas Prayer Challenge, Advent with C.S. Lewis. For the 25 days leading up to Christmas, you can focus on the real reason for the season with prayer, meditation, and Christmas music on Hallow. Download the app for free at hallow.com/Matt Walsh for 3 months free. That's hallow.com/Matt Walsh. The first column of this memo ends with these 2 action items. Fertility control agents in the water supply encourage women to work. Now, it goes without saying that they have encouraged women to work. There are more women in the workforce than ever before. There are also more women taking SSRIs and divorcing their husbands. So, mission accomplished. But the other bullet point needs some more explanation. Fertility control agents in the water supply. What could that possibly mean? Outside of chemical spills from train derailments, where have we seen that? Well, we have seen it. Again, pretty much no one talks about it, but it's true. Here's an article from the Daily Mail from October 2020. Quote, birth control hormone is making its way into streams and hindering fish's ability to reproduce. The article notes that, quote, up to 90% of birth control is unmetabolized and flushed down the toilet. The piece continues, A 2015 study from Washington State University found a link between synthetic estrogen and the growing decline in sperm counts, which have plummeted up to 38% in a decade. Now, this synthetic estrogen can have effects on humans, even in very limited concentrations. Frederick von Saul, a biology professor at the University of Missouri, told the National Catholic Register that the fake estrogen, quote, can cause effects in human tissue at concentrations in blood below 1 part per trillion. So this is an extremely potent drug. Is that why sperm counts in men are plummeting? Is that why birth rates are dropping? No one's been able to offer an explanation for what's happening to sperm counts, but it's clearly a major problem. Watch.
If you look at the sperm concentrations, when we last looked at them, which was samples collected in 2011, the sperm concentration in Western countries was 47 million per milliliter, down from 99 million per milliliter 39 years earlier. So that's a decline of more than 1% per year. And it would predict between 2011 and now, which is 10 years, that we would be now below 40 million per milliliter. And that's an important number because below 40, it becomes increasingly difficult for couples to become pregnant. And how low it's going to go before we wake up and say we have to stop this, I don't know how long that's going to take, but it's urgent.
This is another one of those things that it's a catastrophic, like world-changing, potentially civilization-ending problem that almost nobody talks about. And does this crisis have anything to do with the chemicals we're putting in the water supply and in pharmaceuticals? If so, it would be yet another bullet point achieved by Planned Parenthood in their agenda. So let's go through the rest of it. It also says modify tax policies, substantial marriage tax, tax married more than single, eliminate paid maternity leave or benefits. Now, for most couples, we don't have any kind of tax penalty for marriage in this country, at least not officially, not yet. That's one element of the draft memo that remains unfulfilled, but maternity leave and benefits are definitely on the decline. CNBC reports that, quote, in 2022, organizations offering employees paid maternity leave dropped to 35% from 53% in 2020. Currently, there isn't a federal paid leave program, and only 11 states plus the District of Columbia offer the benefit. Then if you go down the list, back to the draft memo, you'll find these two words, chronic depression. That's under the column heading of economic deterrence / incentives for depopulating the planet. So they want to make sure that as many people are as depressed as possible, and then because they're depressed, they won't want to start a family. Now, this is something that you never hear anyone say out loud. We're supposed to pretend that everyone's trying to prevent chronic depression, that the SSRIs are making everything better, etc. But at least for Planned Parenthood and the rest of these eugenicists, depression has some upside. And when we look at the fact that, we know that these antidepressant drugs that everyone's taking, that they've been prescribed under false pretenses of curing a chemical imbalance that doesn't exist. And you see that they're still being prescribed, even though they don't work. And you wonder why that's the case. Well, maybe for the powers that be, they're not supposed to work. And they also, we know, they don't want anyone owning any property. Back to the draft memo says, quote, housing policies, discouragement of private home ownership. That's a version of the WEF's line about how you'll own nothing and be happy. And Planned Parenthood wrote it all the way back in 1969. And then there's the last column, quote, payments to encourage sterilization, payments to encourage contraception, payments to encourage abortion, abortion and sterilization on demand, allow certain contraceptives to be distributed non-medically, improve contraception technology, make contraception truly available and accessible to all. Well, again, mission accomplished. With Planned Parenthood leading the charge, so-called gender-affirming care, quote unquote, is now available on demand in much of the country. Children could take hormones that will sterilize them for life. Meanwhile, major corporations are paying employees to fly out of state to murder their children. Now, of course, not everything in the draft memo has come true. Compulsory abortion, for example, is not yet the law of the land. We're not forcing people to commit murder, at least not yet. But that may be coming sooner than you think. Consider the fact that euthanasia, known as MAID or medical assistance in dying, is now the 6th leading cause of death in Canada. And MAID does not require a terminal diagnosis in Canada. In fact, Canada's government is killing some people simply because they're disabled or mentally ill or can't find housing. They're even planning to open MAID up to so-called mature minors nationwide. And disabled people in Canada are openly talking about this. They're talking about the fact that the government is eager to kill them. Watch.
If you call the number on the government website, they will provide doctors that will sign off for you.
Like many disabled Canadians, she is stuck in a cycle of poverty and despair.
It's no hope for anybody in Ontario. That's a good boy.
So she's planning to end her life
Up.
with the government's help.
They could have me dead in 90 days. That's what I was told.
Like in my case, the problem is not really the disability. It is the poverty.
Les Landry is in the same position, wanting to live, but seeing no other option than death.
These two are for my asthma. This is for my COPD. Since when did we stop looking at the value of human life in this country?
It's a question people with disabilities and their advocates ask constantly.
So full-on dystopian future has been achieved in Canada, and it's heading here as well. And what is Canada's government doing about this? Are they trying to reverse course? Are they trying to find a way to help these people live? Just the opposite, actually. Just this week, Statistics Canada, which is the agency in Canada's government that catalogs how people are dying in Canada, announced on social media that it's effectively going to start hiding the statistics on MAID. And here's what they wrote about their record-keeping practices going forward. Quote, "The underlying cause of death is defined as the disease or injury that initiated the train of morbid events leading directly to death. As such, MAID deaths are coded to the underlying condition for which MAID was requested." In response to that post, one Canadian asked for some clarification. He wrote, quote, "How do you classify people with a disability that do not have a foreseeable death or people that chose MAID because of mental health issues?" And here's how the agency responded to that. Quote, "Deaths are coded using the World Health Organization's International Classification of Disease and Related Health Problems. In the case of a disability, deaths are coded to the underlying disability or mental health issue that MAID was granted for." So in other words, if somebody is depressed and the Canadian government puts them down like dogs, Canada will record that as a death due to depression, not euthanasia or suicide. Now, if it doesn't seem like something like this could ever happen here, you should know that already efforts are underway to bring MAID to the United States. In November, at a meeting of the American Medical Association, a resolution was proposed to remove this line from the association's guidelines. Quote, "Physicians must not perform euthanasia or perform assisted suicide." And instead of that line, members of the AMA proposed this revision. Quote, "Resolved, that our American Medical Association adopt a neutral stance on medical aid in dying and respect the autonomy and right of self-determination of patients and physicians in this matter." So at this rate, it's only a matter of time before we adopt Canada's MAID program wholesale in this country. It's only a matter of time until we have a marriage tax, just like the ones Frederick Jaffe was writing about. With every passing year, we get closer and closer to realizing every single wish list item on the Jaffe memo. We've seen this agenda unfold in front of our eyes for decades. It's right there in front of us. It's not happening naturally. It's not inevitable. It was pre-planned. And even now, it's still in progress. And when you realize that, it puts the fake debates over climate change and quote-unquote gender-affirming care in context. Whatever branding they come up with, the end goal is, and has always been, the same: depopulation. It is an anti-human agenda. And that is where all this activism leads. You could choose to believe that it's a coincidence. You could come up with some alternative theory for why every single left-wing cause happens to match perfectly with the Jaffe memo and with the people that outlined their plan to depopulate the planet. But whatever the case, there's one thing you can't deny, which is that all the way back in 1969, Planned Parenthood planned all of this. Hey, YouTube, thanks for listening to the show. If you'd like access to my full show with no ads, you should go to dailywire.com and use promo code Walsh to get 2 months free on all annual plans. See you there.